Tonight, we take a close look at the growing debate surrounding guns in America and the sometimes fatal consequences playing out on American streets and homes when they are put in the wrong hands. And Reverend Al Sharpton today met with Mayor Bill de Blasio and the Police Commissioner Bill Bratton amidst the investigation surrounding the death of 43-year-old Eric Garner. Will community relations really improve between the people and the NYPD? Plus, the U.S. Attorney, Preet Bharara, does more digging and also talking as it relates to Governor Cuomo's now defunct Moreland Commission. Why is Bharara dedicating so much time to the investigation if there's nothing for the governor to hide? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. And tonight, we start with a familiar subject on this program, a look at the growing firestorm over firearms in this country. Now, just this week, we saw 6 police officers shot across this country. 29 police officers have died in the line of duty due to gun-related injuries this year, and 72 police officers have been killed on the job this calendar year. The numbers of officers killed by firearms is up 65% just over a calendar year ago when we were at a historic low in 2013. And if you want real-life examples of it, just look to yesterday. Wednesday night, a police officer fatally shot while making a traffic stop in Minnesota. Authorities took the suspect into custody hours later after that gun battle. And on Monday, we saw a similar scene unfold right here in our region in New York, where 2 U.S. Marshals and a New York police detective were shot while trying to capture a fugitive charged with molesting a child. We go to Kansas, where a mother speaking out after a 3-year-old son was shot and killed, all by his own hand with a gun he found in the home while his mother was taking a nap after working the overnight shift. And not surprisingly, this incident unfolded in Kansas. And if you want to know how the legislatures are not in tune here with some of the realities, Kansas is the very same state here where that child died that has recently adopted what it calls the Second Amendment Protection Act. What is that, you ask? Well, it's a law that is attempting to exempt guns made in Kansas and that remain in Kansas from all federal gun control laws and would make it a felony for a federal official to enforce them. So basically, if you make a gun in Kansas, no rules from anywhere would apply. And those rules would include laws requiring serial numbers and background checks, as well as laws barring the sale of handguns to minors, children, as well as the sale of firearms to violent domestic abusers. These are literally what legislatures in this country are working on right now. Meanwhile, when we go to our nation's capital, this week, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on the subject of gun violence against women. One senator says American women are 11 times more likely to be killed by a gun than women in any other industrialized nation. Think about that. Former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, his anti-gun group, Every Town for Gun Safety, they've released a powerful new public service announcement which is gaining a lot of attention. Take a look.
911, what's your emergency?
It's my ex. He's trying to break in.
Do you have a restraining order?
This is my
Yes,
house.
please, my son is here.
Open the door!
I need you to stay calm.
He just broke in the door. You need to come now. Get away from him. Hey! Put him down! Get away! Get out of here!
I'm taking him!
And unfortunately, that jarring spot here isn't just made to grab attention. It's dealing with a real issue, as we have indicated. Violence against women, especially at the end of a gun, and numbers across this country, state by state, bear out here what some even call an epidemic. Now, Democrats and Republicans and independents, for that matter, they all take different positions when it comes to gun control. But what I want you to do is I want you to consider, and if you saw this already, you know where I'm going. There was an op-ed piece that grabbed our attention today, and it came from the New York Times columnist Nick Kristof. He made what I thought was a straight-on point in this piece. Kristof, he compared gun safety to car safety. And bear with me, because you'll see how this conversation through the last century here, but even to these conversations we hear now, is right on point. He makes the issue here. The car-related deaths have dropped by, get this, 95% since 1921, and it wasn't by accident. Christoph says that we could have said, quote unquote, cars don't kill people, people kill people. Sound familiar? He went on to say that there would have been an element of truth to that. Many accidents are a result of alcohol consumption, speeding, road rage, or driver distraction. The truth is that we regulate cars quite intelligently, instituting evidence-based measures to reduce fatalities, yet the gun lobby is too strong, or our politicians too craven to do the same thing for guns. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, has covered this issue with us before. And Andrew, I saw the piece this morning, and we hear often, even after Newtown, it's too hard. The gun lobby's too strong. American opinion's too entrenched on this. But there were arguments when we tried to put in speed limits across this country, when we tried to mandate that people wore seatbelts, that we, try to put any restrictions that you had to have a license to have a car. People, if you look on your own time here to American debates around those subjects, either they were unpopular, people thought they weren't feasible, or people thought they were an infringement on rights. But in every single case, we did the hard thing and we fought it, whether through public service announcements, legislatively. And now it's uncool not to have your seatbelt on, let alone illegal. It's uncool to drive 100 miles an hour and laugh about it anymore because you're going to get a ticket and it's not safe. Road rage, again, you don't with a wink and a nod do it. And the same thing goes for drunk driving. We have done this in this country. We've managed to do it. And people, by the way, still drive cars. They don't take away the rights. You could do it for guns. It would take a lot of political will, but it's not impossible.
You certainly could do it for guns. I'm struck by, on the polar opposite of your setup, the Nick Kristof piece, talking about what seems like sensible, as he said, evidence-based suggestions and ways to try to minimize some of the dangers and some of the risks. But that came just a moment after you talked about Kansas and the law that they passed, which seemed to open it up to basically everything goes when it comes to guns and gun laws. And it's, we've talked about this many times, but it's a combination of the NRA and the effectiveness of the NRA. It's, I think, also has to do with the Second Amendment, the fact that people feel like there's a right to the handguns that they have. But it's also that popular sentiment in a lot of this country hasn't picked up or gained speed in the way that we would have thought. And so that's also why I was heartened to see the Bloomberg spot that you ran, the PSA, which I thought was incredibly effective, incredibly moving. And that's the kind of make it uncool motivation that I think you were talking about with some of the car changes that we've seen. I mean, there weren't states that were making it easier to drive like a Danger back in the early 70s, but slowly but surely it became uncool to drive drunk. It became uncool to not wear your seatbelt. It became uncool to not drive in a responsible fashion. And we have to figure out a way to how to do that with guns too.
What always strikes me is when we talk about guns and on different state levels, we mentioned Kansas, and again, if it was a little obtuse, basically what they said is, if they can produce a gun in Kansas, and there are some pretty decent-sized gun manufacturers in Kansas, and it won't hold up in the court of law, but the point is, they would argue that no rules apply to them. So the very day that we saw a 3-year-old tragically take his own life because there was a gun left alone at house, theoretically, the kid could have legally had a gun if it was a gift here and there would be nothing wrong with it. But we've seen in Georgia, people can bring guns into bars right now and consume alcohol, and they've made that part of the law. We've seen in different states you can go to church with a gun. We've seen in different states you can have a gun on campus in your college dorm right down the hall from the kegger. We've seen in different states here that you can go to public parks with. The point is that I see polls in those same states, Andrew, and that doesn't poll well. Now, you've worked in more markets than I have. You've been in the red states of the Montanas of the world, and then deep in Texas and Louisiana and other places where many people in our region maybe haven't been, and there's a gun culture. I get it. But I'm still struck that if a politician said, you know what, if I don't vote to have a gun in a bar, am I really going to lose the election? I think people would be shocked because every national number says 3/4 of members of the NRA believe in background checks. 90+% of Americans believe in background checks to get a gun. I think the political cowardice for this is misplaced because I think the public won't vote you out if you do. I'm not saying go as far as maybe the progressive gun movement wants to go in terms of restricting it, but if you make certain sensible things that make no sense on the front, Do you think I'm wrong?
I think you're wrong at this point. I don't think we've gotten to the point, the tipping point that you're looking for in terms of there being political protection for people who are willing to vote against these gun laws. And part of that, I think, is up to the Bloombergs of the world as well, that there hasn't been that
That's
political...
really sad, isn't
That
it? We got to depend on a billionaire to go in his pocket to try and change public opinion.
But there hasn't been the political backbone, the political, backing for people to oppose the NRA, and even Bloomberg's group is still having trouble getting off the ground in that front. We haven't quite seen it. The last time that happened was in Colorado. They passed a gun control bill, and state lawmakers, including the president of the state Senate, lost their job because people voted on it. We're still at a point where gun advocates, the pro-gun people, it's a number one or number two voting issue. That's the thing that's going to get them to the polls and determine who they're going to pick when they're making their choice in the ballot box. But for gun control, it's not nearly as big an issue. There are some, but we're not to the point yet where it's a number one or number two voting issue. And until we get there, you're not going to see that political courage just yet. Maybe that's where a Bloomberg group can help change public opinion and can actually make a difference.
We got to go to break, but I'll just leave you on what I think is this hopeful note. We can, as a country, do more to protect women. We can, as a country, do more to make it harder for kids to be able to get their hands on guns. And we can, as a country, do more to protect our law enforcement on the front lines here without taking away people's right to bear arms. This is not one of those things we should throw our hands up and say this is just the way it is. We can do better, and Lord knows we should. Okay, when we come back here, we will switch gears. Mayor Bill de Blasio says the time for change is now when it comes to community police relations. What does that mean? Well, today, Bill de Blasio met with none other than Reverend Al Sharpton and the Police Commissioner Bill Bratton to weigh in on the Eric Garner case and steps to improve community police relations here. Sharpton didn't hold back what he had to say about the mayor's son when we come back.